What lengths will the U.S. go to get Greenland? It's been a few months of calm after U.S.-Denmark relations hit shocking lows. President Trump had promised to get the Danish territory one way or another and didn't rule out military force. But 6 months later, is the strategy to quietly convince Greenlanders from within to join the U.S.? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is Greenland. Last week in Copenhagen, the top U.S. diplomat was summoned over a report claiming U.S. citizens were conducting covert operations in Greenland. Danish broadcaster DR said 3 men were seeking to infiltrate Greenlandic society, with one attempting to recruit people for a secessionist movement. Now, given U.S. President Trump's promise to make Greenland part of the United States, uncovering covert operations shouldn't be a surprise. But are they legal? And moreover, could they really work? Here's a look.
Greenland, vast, mineral-rich, and strategically placed in the Arctic. For Denmark, it's part of the kingdom. For President Trump, it's a prize the United States must have. On the 27th of August, Denmark summoned acting US ambassador to Denmark, Mark Stroh, over reports that revealed at least 3 US citizens with ties to Trump are accused of covert influence operations, compiling lists of pro-Trump Greenlanders and seeking to weaken Copenhagen's grip. Denmark's foreign minister called it unacceptable interference, a rare and serious rebuke of Washington from a close NATO ally. For Greenland, caught in the middle, the allegations strike a nerve. Its people debate independence, but not under American terms. Earlier this year, Donald Trump Jr. made a so-called private visit, drawing attention and raising eyebrows in Copenhagen. Then in March, Vice President J.D. Vance arrived and aimed his criticism squarely at Denmark.
Our message to Denmark is very simple. You have not done a good job by the people of Greenland. You have underinvested in the people of Greenland, and you have underinvested in the security architecture of this incredible, beautiful landmass filled with incredible people. That has to change.
Trump's desire for Greenland remains in place, and he says so without hesitation.
We need Greenland, very importantly, for international security. We have to have Greenland. It's not a question of, do you think we can do without it? We can't.
But on the island, many say independence must come on their own terms, not by swapping one foreign power for another. Analysts argue Trump's pressure has only hardened Greenland's resistance.
Now, Trump has scared most Greenlanders away from this idea about a closer relationship to the United States because they don't trust him, because they see how he treats Denmark, how he treats Canada, and so on and so forth. And do you really want a friend like that? So in that sense, he has convinced most Greenlanders at the moment that the US is not a viable alternative. And therefore, he's pushed us together inside the current construction.
Now, with diplomats summoned and protests lodged, Denmark insists Greenland's future cannot be shaped from outside. A diplomatic protest today might quickly fade, but beneath it lies a harsher truth that Greenland's ice, minerals, and strategic position have made it a prize too tempting to ignore. The contest over its future has only just begun.
Well, let's get some perspective now from inside Greenland. And joining me from Nuuk, Greenland's former Minister of Foreign Affairs and leader of Nalarak, a pro-independence party, Pelle Broberg. Pelle, thank you so much for being with us. What do you, as a Greenlander, make of the report that U.S. citizens were not only looking to influence the population, but one seemed to be attempting to kind of rally a secessionist movement? Do you believe it's true? And if so, what should be the consequences?
Well, first of all, I have to say that independence will never be a movement from other countries. We have been trying to become independent from Denmark for, well, a lot of centuries, I was about to say, since we've been colonized. So that's not an American thing, that's a Greenlandic thing. And second of all, the report is with regards to Charlie Kirk and Tom Dance, as well as Drew Horn back in January and February, and all of them have already been in Greenlandic television or stuff like that. So it's not news reporting, it's just reporting about what happened before the election. So for us, there's nothing new in it. Not that we don't necessarily disregard influence from other countries, because we are used to Danes being in Greenland and influencing Greenlandic politics as well. So no, we're not. I'm not looking at it as some new revelation.
Okay, so why do you think it's making such kind of headlines in Denmark?
Your guess is as good as mine, but one of the things I can imagine is because of the contraception scandal, the genocide that the Danish government committed on the Inuit back in the 60s and 70s. That report was about to be published, and the prime minister just gave a public apology for the Danish role in that genocide. So I think the timing looked peculiar because it was the same morning that let's call it the news broke. But the news from Denmark's radio has been comprehensively covered already by TV2 and DR. And funny enough, it's not done by the local reporters in Greenland.
Okay. Well, let's look at this, though. I mean, President Trump, as you know, he's promised that he will get Greenland. So what do you fear the most about what the U.S., might try to do? Having seen what the U.S. actually did, some are arguing in the lead up to the war in Iraq, for example, by creating a false premise in order to get what they believed the U.S. government wanted at the time. Do you fear something similar, or perhaps more surreptitious could happen in Greenland so that the U.S., within the 3 years now, 3.5 that he has left in office, will get what Trump has promised?
Well, one of the things I can say for certain is that Denmark annexed Greenland in 1953, and we are still trying to get away from the Danish kingdom. And all on top of that, we have noticed that President Trump at the State of the Union, as far as I recall, said that the Greenlandic people should determine their own future. So no, I'm looking at this as kind of scaremongering among the Danes, afraid of losing Greenland. And unfortunately, it resonates with a lot of them because all the horrors the Inuit has suffered at the hands of the Danes, they're afraid to have them repeated by the Americans. But people tend to forget that the U.S. is currently defending Greenland, not Denmark. Denmark can't even defend Denmark. That's why you see German and French ships and troops in Greenland these times to support Denmark.
Okay.
So I think it's
I realize that,
to scare us.
You are a leader of the pro-independence movement, but just to be clear, pro-independence for you means not just independence from Denmark. It would mean never succumbing to U.S. demands that Greenland become part of the U.S.?
No, we will never fight for independence just for our country to be owned by another country. So we are looking for the U.S. as an ally, as a defender of Greenland, just like all the European countries are looking to the US to give security guarantees for Ukraine. We are looking for security guarantees from the US and be a nation, not be American citizens. Okay. And I think the Americans know this. So there's nothing for us to fear but fear itself.
But it's not actually just about the US versus Denmark or versus Greenland here. There are other multinationals that have very active investments and mining deals in Greenland right now. We know a Canadian company actually just signed a critical minerals deal backed by the EU in June. So do you worry a bit about how the U.S. might try to kind of unravel those commitments? Because some are connecting Trump's plan to make Canada, or suggestion to have made Canada a 51st state, connecting that to the effort to take Greenland as well.
Well, I will not be a very good politician if I didn't know what was going on in other countries with regards to Greenland. But on the other hand, I don't claim to be an expert on American politics. So the only thing I can say for certain is that Greenland and the U.S. have signed an agreement in 2020, back when it was Trump's first presidency. with greater collaboration with regards to mining and businesses and all other areas that we have our own sovereignty on. And unfortunately, we've seen a 4-year term where there didn't happen much. So I think what they're trying to do is actually try to accommodate the Inuit, the Greenlanders, of what we actually wanted to do in the first place, instead of just placating the Danes and trying not to offend the Danish kingdom. Because if you look at how they viewing minerals, critical minerals in Greenland, is that it's not just a US or Canadian or EU, it's a Western opinion we are always referring to. But people tend to forget that we have a say in this as well, because the minerals is something we control entirely. But that doesn't mean that we are saying the US can't have them, the EU can't have them. We are willing to talk with anybody. That's why there are Canadians, Americans, well, most nationalities from the Western Hemisphere is in Greenland right now.
Okay.
And I think if we just dial down the rhetoric a little bit and forget a little bit about who owns what, then you will see that the path forward is quite simple with the collaboration, and that should be with an independent Greenland with security guarantees from the
Okay.
US.
Pele Broberg, we will have to leave it there. I'd like to thank you sincerely so much for being with us on this edition of the Newsmakers. Greatly appreciated.
Quite welcome.
Well, let's broaden out the discussion now and welcome 3 new panelists. And joining me from Copenhagen, journalist and former editor-in-chief of the Danish national newspaper, Information, David Trads. From Sæby in Denmark, associate professor with the Department of Arctic Social Science and Economics at Greenland University, Jeppe Strandbjerg. And from Washington, senior advisor at the Defense and Security Department of the Center for Strategic and International Studies, as well as a retired U.S. Army Colonel, Mark Kansian. Thank you all so much for being with me. David, let me start with you, because we heard kind of a perspective from a Greenlander, but who's also a politician. And I'm wondering what you made of the exchange. Do you also agree that there really is no worry, or shouldn't be a worry whatsoever, that there is the suspicion that the U.S. are running covert operations, as symbolized by these 3 men?
What I think is important here to remember is that the politician we just heard from Greenland is kind of like on the extreme side of the Greenlandic secessionist movement. So he doesn't really represent the official Greenland point of view. So when you look to what's actually happening in Greenland with regards to we can almost call it cyber attacks and influence meddling by officials or people around the U.S. administration, then I think it's a big worry. And I say that because this is not just some conspiracy that Danish media came up with. This is all based on intelligence by the 2 Danish intelligence agencies. And they specifically say that they have learned that U.S. citizens associated with the Trump administration in one way or the other, they are trying to meddle in Danish Greenlandic affairs. In other words, they're trying to influence voters and citizens of Greenland in ways that are not normal.
Yeah. Jeppe, I mean, as far as the 3 U.S. citizens are concerned, suspected of trying to infiltrate Greenlandic society, possibly build a stronger secessionist movement, do you believe it's part of, a planned wider strategy? Will we see more of this in the future?
To the last question, yes, probably we will see more of it. I think it's important to remember that, the U.S. has had a very significant influence on the sort of wider constitutional standing of Greenland since the Second World War. And since 2020, with the opening of the consulate, the U.S. I believe that the U.S. has prepared itself for how to deal with an ever more independent Greenland. And part of that, I would be surprised if the U.S. consulate had not, since 2020, when it opened, been gathering information, intelligence, like who is sympathetic towards the U.S., who can we cooperate with, and these kind of things. What might be new here is, and that's a question we do not really know, but is a direct order to sort of increase the sort of the distance between Greenland and Denmark. Is it a direct attempt to to lower the standing of Denmark in Greenlandic society and sort of try to sort of push to some of these conflicts. And to what extent this takes place, I don't think anybody, well, somebody knows. I don't know. But I would imagine that we will see more of it.
Okay. Well, let me ask Colonel Kansian if he has a guess of how far it might go, because as I mentioned earlier, you know, President Trump only has, well, he's less than 4 years in office, and this is a huge undertaking he's talking about. Where do you see it going? Is he going to be determined to deliver on this promise, you know, to spare himself what some could consider humiliation for failing if he doesn't get Greenland? So what would you be expecting the U.S. with steps they would take to make this happen?
I expect that the United States will want some sort of agreement, economic agreement, maybe going a little further than the 2020 agreement. President Trump is very focused on trade and economics, and an agreement like that, I think, would meet his needs. There's, of course, been a lot of concern that the United States might invade Greenland. I think that is extremely unlikely. I think a good parallel is Panama, where the Trump administration blustered and threatened, and then accepted an agreement that improved some economic relationships. I wouldn't be surprised if that's what we saw here, but we may well see more of these influence operations continuing, though at a relatively low level.
Okay, so let me ask David then, what you think Greenlanders should look out for, you know, to be aware of as per how there could be potentially attempts to manipulate them and to be aware of some kind of U.S. strategy to take more influence in Greenland?
Well, I think it's always important to remember the size, the scale of Greenland. Greenland is an enormous country, about 1/3 of the entire area of the US today, for instance. So it's not like those 55,000 people who live in this enormous area, they meet all the time. So they generally have public and political discussions through the internet, especially through Facebook. So where I would worry if I were a Greenland voter here would be to see what kind of influence, what kind of cyber attacks, what kind of fake personalities that would suddenly appear in the Facebook accounts. And I can see that from Greenlandic news media right now, that in Greenland, people are concerned about sudden new persons who appear on Facebook with comments, with suggestions, with trying to wedge the people, to put a wedge in between the different opinions here. So I would specifically, if I were in Greenland, be looking for new persons, so to speak, who would suddenly appear online and have opinions that are not the opinions that you would normally see. That's one thing where I would say here you really have to be concerned. But on the other hand, I think we also have to take into consideration that the Danish intelligence community have actually said that you see American agents of some kind actually trying to attract, influence, and convince specific politicians, business leaders, opinion makers in Greenland about joining the U.S. instead of being part of the Danish kingdom.
And what, on the flip side of that, though, what about the Danes in this? You know, part of this kind of suspected covert campaign is to form negative opinions of Denmark and of Danish rule. But it's funny, even if you succeed in doing that, wouldn't it only show that living under the rule of a foreign country is not good for the indigenous society?
Well, I think, again, it's not like there is an extremely strong desire for people in Greenland to leave Denmark and the Danish kingdom as of now and very quickly. So that's one thing that is important. But I think if you're looking at this from the point of view of a Greenlander who would like to have more independence, then of course it doesn't help to see a country so much bigger than Denmark suddenly trying to influence Greenland. And here's a thing that anybody who has ever been influenced by the US in any country, they know this. When the U.S. arrives, they want to decide everything.
You know, it's interesting, Jeppe, because Trump hasn't been very clear on exactly what the strategy will be. We mentioned he didn't rule out military force, though many doubt that could ever happen. But there are some interesting tactics that we've heard suggested. One not dissimilar to what Argentina tried to do with the Falkland Islanders back in the 1990s after they lost the Falkland Islands War. They tried to buy the citizenship of the Falkland Islands residents. I mean, there are only 50,000 Greenlanders. Would that be possible? And what do you think Greenland would make of such an effort if they're offered a lot of money to hand some more sovereignty over to the U.S.?
The political line from the government is that we're not for sale, right? And that has also been Pele Broberg's line. I had a ride with a taxi driver one day who said, what could gold doesn't make you happy. He was like, I don't want to sell my country for gold or my soul for gold. So I think generally there's a strong sense of pride in Greenland, of being Greenlander, but also proud of the status that Greenland has. Greenland is indigenous nation, the country with an indigenous population that is closer to statehood than any other. And I think these things matters a lot to people. So I doubt that Greenlanders, that the idea of selling your citizenship would be viable. I really doubt that.
Okay.
And I think there's a wide sense that the Trump administration had underestimated Greenland and Greenlanders and the pride and sort of, so, and it seems as if the Trump administration has withdrawn and sort of tried to relaunch a new tactics. And he talks about winning the hearts and minds of Greenland and trying to sort of make the US popular. But then again, if that was the tactic, why not continue from what they did up before Trump was elected, after continue the work of the consulate. The US consulate was quite popular in Nuuk. Whenever there was a Facebook post from the US consulate, it would be met with smileys, applause. When they do it now, lots of angry faces, lots of derogative comments, lots of anger. And it seems that the winning hearts of mind agenda has sort of completely been rewound, and you have to start from scratch. If that is what you want to pursue.
Okay.
But again, in case of just buying Greenland and military invasion, that seems like the only option, right?
Let me ask the Colonel what you think of that, because you've actually said what the United States is doing is in a gray area. What exactly do you mean by that?
By that, I mean that what the United States is doing is trying to convince the people of Greenland, or at least appears that way, that they would be better off with the United States than with Denmark. I mean, these kinds of infiltration operations, below the level of conflict, but they go beyond, normal diplomatic relationships. Looks like this is being carried out by surrogates. And the Trump administration truly believes that Greenland would be better off with the United States than with Denmark. And if you look at it objectively, I mean, there's a lot to be said for that. The problem is it ignores both the pride of Greenlanders, who don't want to be under anybody's control, and the 1,000 years of history that exists between Greenland and Denmark. But President Trump, he was a real estate developer. He sees these relationships as very transactional. And to him, it just makes sense that Greenland would be better off with the United States.
What about pitching, a kind of Puerto Rico style arrangement? Would that ever be attractive? Not that, there are plenty of Puerto Ricans who aren't happy with that arrangement either, but for decades, that's been the agreement.
Well, first, Puerto Rico has a great deal with the United States. And when it's been put to a vote, the independence movement gets something like 7%. And the rest are split between the current arrangement, which is a commonwealth, and becoming a state. You could imagine that kind of arrangement with Greenland. The United States also has some territories in the Pacific. There's Guam and Samoa, American Samoa. And you can make an argument that Greenland would be better off with an arrangement like that. But as I said, that ignores the feelings of the Greenlanders and the long history with Denmark.
All right, David, quick final words.
Well, I think it's important again to remember, and this is something that we take very seriously in Denmark, that President Trump has had two chances to refuse the use of force in Greenland. In other words, he has had two chances where he could say, I'm not going to war over Greenland. And he has said he will not refuse that possibility. That is scary from the point of view of Denmark and Greenland, that such a big power, the biggest power we have on this earth, is actually refusing the use of military force in Greenland. So that is scary, and that is something that the Danish government obviously takes extremely serious.
Okay, that will have to be the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us, our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.